Okay, so we're going to talk about non-duality and mindfulness, and they're next to each other on the model, so we thought we could just combine them in a chat. Yeah, and we thought we'd start with non-duality. So there's something for me, like as part of this model, it's kind of an expression of this, which is that I feel like there's different ways of holding non-duality, and one of the most important things about it for me is that it doesn't collapse complexity. It's like it like increases the capacity to understand experience, to like see the different complex parts of it. So like an example of this is that a sort of a way that would collapse the complexity with non-duality would be to make kind of blanket statements like everything is mind, that just sort of like oversimplify experience a bit and kind of end up gaslighting out the bits of our experience that are important, where there's a way that, you know, for example, well, yeah, I guess like as an expression of this, the model is that experience is made up of body, mind, heart and soul, which could be called different things, but it's almost like all four of those things are coming together to create our experience in a way that's incredibly complex and in a certain way is non-dual because they all rely on each other.
They're not really separate.
Yeah, but they're not one thing.
Yeah, or you lose something if you just say that one thing. You lose the nuance and the sort of sophistication.
Yeah, exactly. So it feels like, to me, this part feels a lot like an invitation into a kind of, like a really sort of like magical, interesting, quite kaleidoscopic part of experience. And yeah, I wondered, I don't know, is there anything you would add to that kind of like initial?
Yeah, I think any statement that starts like everything is problematic, and I would also extend that to when people say it's all one. Like, that's great, you know, like that's probably more true than saying we're all separate selves. Like, I think it is more true. It's like definitely closer to reality. But non-duality, literally, it's like non-dual, not two. It doesn't say it's one, it says it's not really two. You could also say things are not really one either. They're beyond one or two. Things are, you know, counting things is a kind of duality in itself. So, like, things can be counted, but that is a construction, just like all the other dualities that we might construct or that might sort of arise in experience and in the world.
Yeah, nice. And the bit on the model, the non-duality, the kind of like triangulation of it is that it's the meeting of mind and relationship, or it's the meeting of cultivating openness through practicing investigation. And so there's a kind of like, I think the thing that you were saying about the like not just saying that everything is one, but that being a sort of truth, it's almost like orienting towards a kind of deep connection with experience in a way where you're not separate from it, is the openness part. But it's like keeping the investigative mind kind of switched on and being like, what is this relationship between me and experience? What is this relationship between me and another person? What is this relationship between... It's kind of like curiosity that opens the door rather than a kind of like just deciding that it's a certain way or not another way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wondered, are there things in your experience that feel like interesting parts of non-duality, or things that feel like nice bits of it that you connect to? Or
Well, I guess an important bit of it to talk about is like so non-duality is, it's a kind of whatever, it's a concept, an idea, and there's also like the tradition of non-duality, and in the non-dual tradition, what we're mostly talking about is the duality of self and other, right? The duality of self and everything else. And I guess that feels pretty central to me, to the idea of non-duality, because it's arguably the most like, well, I don't know if the most, but one of the most like liberating things to see the non-duality of, the non-dual nature of, is the constructed duality between self and world. And what you were saying about bringing like curious investigation, it's like, I guess the first part of that would be to notice that there is this duality, that I'm sensing this self and this world as separate, that there is a duality in my experience. And then, in so many different traditions, there's this whole array of practices aimed at like unpicking that duality and sort of blurring its edges or blowing it away in different ways. So that feels pretty important.
Yeah, nice.
It's a key part of it.
Yeah. And then it's like, like we said about kind of noticing the parts where you're sensing the duality, because there are also parts, I think part of non-duality, or what I'm including as non-duality here, is dualism in a way. It's like mind-body dualism. It's kind of like the way that your experience is created from these different bits, but it's like, it's almost like it's almost like there's non-duality that points towards non-separateness, and then there's non-duality that points more towards like interdependence, which is kind of like complementary things where they can't exist without the other one, but they are separate from each other. They can be kind of distinguished, and there's, I think, a way in which yourself, myself can be distinguished. There's some ways in which myself can be distinguished from other or the outside world, and there's some ways in which it can blend, and it's like figuring out, just exploring which ones those are, and is cool and fun.
Yeah, and it would be kind of awful if you could never have a duality of self and world like that. You'd be pretty incapable of doing anything. So
salvia. Just the universe would just be a giant salvia entity.
It wouldn't. Nothing much would get done, would it?
Yeah.
And I forgot there was another thing you said that I was going to comment on. That's all right. It's good to name drop salvia. It just doesn't get that much love. Yeah, you were saying like things that are separate. So like mind and body, and so you can, if you never think of those things as separate, then there's probably a whole load of like different practices or ways of thinking about things that would be super useful that you'd then not be doing or encountering, and you'd lose a lot from that.
Yeah.
But if you had a rigid sense that there is mind and there is body and they're separate, then to me that would be also a problem, because you need to see that they're totally interdependent, and in states of meditation often it's what is this sensation? Is it mind? Is it body? Is it emotion? Like sometimes when things get kind of quiet and subtle, we can't really, that duality is not so like active, it's not really so present.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, nice. Yeah. Almost like the process of kind of separation, and then sort of clearer. It's almost like a clearer, the image I get is like a sort of separation that then allows for deeper connection or something.
And more sort of richness and diversity and beauty, I think, as well, or different kinds of beauty. There's like a kind of beauty in things becoming more sort of one, things becoming coming together in some way, like cohering. I think that's beautiful. And there's a kind of beauty in the kind of complexification, like you were talking about earlier, like like things sort of interacting with each other and splitting off and creating worlds and selves and all that kind of thing. One way that that I like to think of it sometimes is in analogy with the Big Bang. Like when the Big Bang happened, there was in the first moments there was just this kind of singularity of white hot, like beyond white hot. There wasn't even matter. There was no distinction between matter and energy. There was just this like, ridiculously dense hot thing. And at that time there were no forces. Like all the forces were just merged into one. And I don't really understand the physics behind this, but this is what I'm told.
Wow, yeah, it's amazing.
Like the strong force, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, gravity, they actually weren't separate. They were all, at those energies, they become one force.
Yeah.
And then as matter congealed out of that like plasma of energy, and as the level of heat cooled, those forces kind of emerged in some way. And the beauty of the universe is due to those forces. Like if the Big Bang never went from that dense white hot sort of oneness to this kind of more diverse expression with different forces, then we wouldn't have richness, beauty,
amazing,
life, all of that kind of thing.
I love that. And there's something in that as well, which is almost like the sort of violent nature of separation, the kind of like explosive, like wrenching.
Mm-hmm.
It feels almost like as a human, the sense of like separation can be quite violent and wrenching and sort of stressful. And so in a way, the sense of like oneness being naturally kind of easier to talk about in a spiritual way, because it's like the peace and the calm and but actually it's like this process of becoming humans and having all this like pain and kind of like wrestling, and then the world gets way more complex through our eyes as well, where we can like see, experience, know. That's really cool. Like I think another way to say that is there's less trouble with oneness. Like oneness it doesn't have any trouble, but it also doesn't have certain kinds of like beauty and diversity and things like that. And trouble or like suffering, dukkha, whatever, is kind of the price that it's kind of like your entry fare for this, all this, which is definitely worth it, I think. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So then maybe this is a nice place to segue into mindfulness.
We can seg there.
Yeah. It's one of those scooters. Into mindfulness, because I think we've sort of chatted a bit about this, but also just generally kind of, I guess, have our own explorations into this, that mindfulness can have it can mean lots of different things. That's the first important thing to say. Everyone means something different when they say mindfulness, but typically the most common usage is a very like, or quite narrow description of like, you're paying attention to these sensations or these things that are what we're engaging with. Whereas I guess you teach meditation, but you also are doing a yoga teacher training, you do soul-making dharma, like there's like a really full range of things that I guess we both include in like mindfulness or being like paying attention to experience, and somehow that feels kind of related to that sense of like the complexity and the sort of kaleidoscopic nature of what's here. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, say anything, what feels important about that.
I'd be interested to hear what you're hearing with that word mindfulness, because like you say, it's different for everyone. For me, the way I think of it for myself is whatever ways that you have to practice with things, whatever ways that you have in your disposal to perceive the world, whether that's just something like coming into my body a little bit more, or it could be something like contemplating like the divine root of this moment, like, you know, just understanding that all of these experiences that I'm having right now, they're in some way coming from a divine source, or they are divine. Like any of these practices, ways of perceiving things, for me, mindfulness is what is the kind of the capacity that remembers, oh yeah, you know, look in that way, like remember to perceive the world in this way, remember your body, remember to look for beauty, remember to enjoy, remember, like all of those things. And the kind of, maybe like say the most common understanding of mindfulness is like your attention, you know where your attention is, and maybe you tell your attention to go to certain places. And that's really important, and that's kind of foundational to what I'm talking about as well. But it doesn't have to be just that, because that leaves out the sort of how of attention. It covers the what or the where, like where is my attention going, what am I paying attention to. But you know, that's only one part of it. The other part of it is, how am I using my attention? What kind of what kind of attention am I bringing? What am I looking for? Because what I'm looking for, how I'm bringing my attention to something, you know, unfolds experience in particular ways.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I really like that. I think you were saying is the like the way things are translated, just being flexible and around that, and like the idea of remembering being a kind of different way of relating to. It just has it gives it a different feel, I guess, is kind of what I was picking up from what you were describing there. And it's almost like, yeah, mindfulness is more, you keep a certain level of control in what you're doing. Whereas remembering, it's more like it's a bit more open and like receptive somehow. It's different vibes.
Yeah, and with what you're saying then, with that sense of control, it can be like, oh yeah, you know, I've got to practice my mindfulness, so I've got to walk really slowly and pay attention to the soles of my feet on the ground, even if I hate that. Like, even if I would rather sort of skip and like do whatever, like, you know, even if I want to like rollerblade, I can't, you know, like whatever it might be, there can be a sense that I need to be quite sort of deliberate and controlled with my movements. And you know, for me, maybe at times that's a really useful practice, for sure. But if that's all we think we're doing with the process of training attention, training awareness to act in certain ways, to rest in certain places, then I think we're missing out on a lot. Like, yeah,
I really like that. Yeah, I think when you say that, there's something in these two things we've been talking about where it's like experience is so complex and so rich, there's so much detail in it that I think like the slowing down, I can feel it's like an opportunity to kind of be with stuff rather than just be sort of like overwhelmed. But yeah, it's like not in the performative nature of being slow that the mindfulness is. It's in it's the slowing down that gives the opportunity. I think for me, an example, like two examples come up almost like opposite ends of the spectrum. I think the first one, I remember, it was like really early days when I'd been doing on my path, I suppose. And I think this is a very common one. It's like the sense of getting really angry and then like seeing that in myself rather than just being in it. There's like the space to actually like know what's happening in your experience that feels somehow connected to mindfulness. And it's almost like the slowing down gives you that opportunity. But yeah, in the example where it's like, I can totally relate to that thing of like, you know, doing very slow walking or something, me just hating it, and then like the thing you can be mindful of is the hatred of the slow walking.
Yeah.
Like that's it's
great.
almost like including more of experience and being aware with what's actually happening. And then yeah, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I guess now how I relate to mindfulness is more like, it's almost like the image I get is kind of like bubbles of things coming up and sort of being revealed to me by like, hey, this is something that's like here in your experience, and me, yeah, being in a more kind of receptive, yeah, remembrance feels that energy, or I'm not sure exactly what the word would be, but it's like a receiving of something that I'm kind of open-minded to be able to see. And yeah, that can be the full spectrum of experience, from emotions, thoughts, right up to the sort of divine nature of experience in the moment.
So you're kind of talking about being a frictionless vessel for experiences to be known in. Is that another way of saying what you?
Yeah,
what you
that's
said?
nice. Yeah, nice way of describing it. And it's almost like the frictionlessness comes from the acceptance, the being willing to be with the thing, and the acceptance of it, even if it's like hard or
right. Yeah. And just something that a lot of people sometimes object to when they hear that word acceptance. It's like, obviously this kind of goes without saying, but it doesn't always go without saying, that acceptance doesn't mean you just have to like everything that's happening in your experience. It doesn't mean that you have to accept it in terms of, well, I won't do anything about it, but it's like, if something's already here, if it's already in my experience, then actually, you know, anything other than acceptance is going to cause kind of friction and conflict, and it's going to be an experience of contraction rather than of ease. So it's making that distinction between like acceptance in the external sense, where it's like accepting the conditions that have led to this, you know, which I may not accept. I may want to change those conditions. I may need to take some action. But there's this internal acceptance. It's like, well, this experience of anger, or this experience of grief, or whatever it is, the experience itself, there's no better attitude than that kind of acceptance, or allowing, or kind of welcoming even. And there's different ways that can feel. Like it can be like a wholehearted, if it's a pleasant experience that's coming up in your awareness, for me, like a wholehearted, like, yes, you know, like, come, like that kind of thing. Like, actually we you know, we want to be a good host for those kinds of experiences. We don't want to just be like, oh yeah, I see you, yeah, you can come, you can go, whatever, like that kind of like fake sort of fake indifference. And with a difficult experience, that welcoming, it might want to be like a different flavour. It might want to be like a cradling, or a very gentle sort of feeling out. Like there's, again, just I think I said something earlier about just this how of attention, rather than just the what. It's like,
lovely.
It's like we want to be this frictionless container, and there's different ways that we can hold experience. Sometimes more like immersed in the thing, sometimes more intense, like this welcoming, like, yes, come, and sometimes softer and more gentle. And there's different qualities we can bring into our mindfulness.
I really like that. All right, one last question, I think. So if you could teach your ideal course, retreat, something on mindfulness, what would you teach? What would you do?
Gosh.
Or mindfulness and non-duality.
Whew. God, I mean, there's probably like loads. My problem is always that I have too many ideas.
Yeah.
I think one thing that would be important for me, really, really important, teaching mindfulness, is that we're practicing with a range of levels of intensity and a range of levels of activity. So definitely a lot of it would be sitting meditation and walking meditation in a kind of like slow kind of way, because you do need to slow down. Like we need to free up energy for our awareness. Like we need to sort of clear some space so that we can see a little better. So we do need to slow down. But you know, when people come off retreat, the world is pretty intense compared to retreat, and I think that's where stuff like physical yoga, asana practice comes in, or making loud noises. I don't know exactly what, but some, or cold water, something like that. Like these intense experiences. If we only practice with silence, I mean, silence can be intense as well. Like it's not that silence is just a walk in the park. Like silence can be really hard, especially for some people with some constitutions. But it's like, yeah, we want this range of what experiences we're able to wholeheartedly welcome and be in. So that would be a part of it. And you know, it's like you've said before, maybe not here, but elsewhere, like in your model, everything reflects everything else, and in, you know, in the Dharma, there's this idea of Indra's net, with, you know, every point reflecting every other point simultaneously. And I think when you get into anything, when you get into mindfulness, you sort of have to draw more and more into it. And I think one of the things that you can't help but draw into mindfulness is like heart qualities, like kindness, compassion, Brahma Viharas, that kind of thing, because mindfulness without those is a chore, and mindfulness with those is kind of easy. And it's not necessarily easy to evoke those, but when they're there, we want to be present, because presence is kind and compassionate, and when there's kindness and compassion, presence comes like really naturally. And when there's not those things, presence can feel like this constant, like dragging a dog on a lead, like back to the road, like stopping it running off, like come back, why do you keep running off? Like it can just, you know, feel like a constant battle. So that was a kind of long answer, but yeah, just to say that you could teach something that focused on mindfulness, and you would just have to bring in other stuff as well.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, and I think I feel the part when you're describing that, like the tree planting retreat you did and things like that as well, where you're really like doing cool things that you enjoy doing, and like that being part of the process. And also the thing about the cold water, I feel like you're good at encouraging things like the cold water swimming, and like healthy eating, and like things like that, where it's kind of creating, there's something in that I see in your way of being with the heart states, where it's not just a sort of it's not just like a exercise, a sort of like obviously not just an intellectual exercise, but it's not even just a kind of like emotional exercise either. It's also like doing the things that actually evoke those things. It's like actually taking care of your body, actually engaging with the world, actually being in nature. Like you're just always kind of doing those things in a way that's feels very meaningful and rich.
Yeah, well, it's just easier. Like those things just make everything so much easier. Yeah, like being in nature. I don't know what I'd do if I could never be in nature. Spiritual practice for me would be so much harder. Like there's a kind of unraveling that happens in the woods or in the sea that just is much harder to come to through sort of isolation and just, you know, my own personal process.
Yeah, nice. Anything else? Anything else we haven't covered or you'd like to expand on before we finish?
Oh, probably. Let's think. Well, mindfulness and non-duality. We haven't talked so much about like how these two might mesh together. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think for me it's because depending which way you're going on the model, it can be the kind of next step along. And I think for me it's like, I think we've maybe like touched on it. I can just sort of feel the resonances of it from the things you were saying about both. There's a way that it's like when you start paying attention to experience, one of the things you come across is the non-duality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like first you get some just like basic emotional awareness and like aware of your own experience a bit more, and then it's like if you're paying attention, you soon suddenly start to notice like, oh, like these thoughts don't belong to me, or different aspects I suppose of non-duality can reveal. And it's almost kind of like and then I guess maybe the other way is with the non-dual bit. It's like if you're not it's the mindfulness that allows for that, the complex aspect of it somehow, because you're kind of letting the complexity of experience reveal itself to you. You're not kind of shutting down. Anything you would add?
Yeah, well, on that last point, it feels to me like mindfulness. The process of noticing something is kind of, it's not neutral, is it? It tends to grow the thing that's noticed. And so when you were saying this complexity part of non-duality, where we're not just trying to sort of merge everything into a sort of oneness, I think it's really interesting that you can use mindfulness to notice the non-dual nature of things. Notice how self and world are just kind of layered onto experience, like actually really in this moment of sensation, etc., the circle that I've drawn around me and everything else, that's kind of arbitrary. So your mindfulness can be used in that way to lean in that direction, or you can choose to notice more the diversity, the complexity. So a more highly, don't know what the word is, like almost like crafted experiences. So the thing that comes is it's like when there's just a sense of something really complex and subtle, like in the atmosphere, like I'm trying to think of an example from my own experience. Like it could be that you're feeling an emotion and there's like a very particular kind of strength in that emotion. Like let's say the emotion is sadness, but there's this kind of sad strength that you maybe haven't experienced in quite that way before. And this is quite a this is very far from this sort of like mergy oneness. This is quite a sort of built up experience, and we can use mindfulness to like pick out those and enrich our experience, like noticing, like a connoisseur with a glass of wine. It's like, if somebody tells you this has blackcurrant notes, then I don't know nothing about wine, but that presumably gives you some kind of greater sense of those blackcurrant notes, and you build up your palate. And then I'm told that the experience of drinking wine is totally different when you've actually deliberately practiced in this way, and it's the same with the richness of experience. Our mindfulness can pick out like the subtle notes, the subtle flavors, and then it's not only does our sensitivity to those grow, but they kind of unfold in their own way as well.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, I think what I was seeing when you were describing that was the sense of like, so in the order where it's mindfulness and then non-duality, the next one is deconstruction, and there's a sense that maybe deconstruction is not quite the right word in that context, but it's like the sort of Vipassana sense of really fine attention to what's here then opens up the richness. And I think there's something in like it's almost like not allowing non-duality to be a stopper point. It's almost like that feeling, the thing where you were describing the spectrum of like, the kind of oneness and the like boundarylessness. It's almost like feeling that and then like keeping going and moving forward into complexity, and then allowing that level of ability to be with detail to increase the richness of what's it.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah, and both are cool and both are great, and maybe some people are more interested in one than the other, and I think that's great as well. But to know that, if you really love this way, just to know that this way is also a thing as well.
Yeah. Nice.
Alrighty.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you.